The boardroom was quiet, almost suffocating in its perfection. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcase Seoul at night. The city lights a scattered constellation beneath the glass. Sang-young Park sat at the head of the table, immaculate in a tailored black suit. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, scanned the last of the investor documents. Outside, the world moved in chaos, but inside, he was always in control. Ye-sun, his secretary, cleared his throat softly. "Sir," the meeting concluded. "Chairman Won is willing to proceed on one condition." Sang-young Park didn't look up. He already suspected. Ye-sun hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Chairman Won doesn't deal with men who don't have a wife. Sir, no wife, no deal." The words landed like a quiet verdict, filling the room with unspoken urgency. Sang-young's jaw tightened. He said nothing. His mind began calculating, weighing options, eliminating impossibilities. Losing this contract would cripple his company. His control couldn't allow that. "Prepare a list," he said finally, his voice even, measured. "Suitable candidates. Qualified, discreet." "Yes, sir," Ye-sun replied, already tapping at his tablet. "I have a few prospects. One of them is Helen Anthony. 28, single, works in tech, looking for a stable relationship. Highly recommended." Sang-young's expression remained neutral. He didn't know her, didn't care yet, but this was business. He only cared about efficiency. Helen Anthony was sitting in a quiet cafe, earbuds in, scrolling through her online dating app. Her hair was neatly pinned back, and her posture reflected a calm confidence. The ping of an unfamiliar email drew her attention. "Confidential proposal, marriage contract" was the subject line. Her brow furrowed, curiosity mingled with caution. She opened it. It was precise, formal, almost surgical in its wording. The man was asking for a marriage contractual, professional, no romance implied. Helen's first reaction was disbelief. Why would any man think this is an acceptable arrangement? She had spent years wanting a partner who was present, committed, genuine. She valued honesty and warmth, not cold pragmatism. A fleeting instinct told her to delete the email immediately, but practicality whispered too. The man behind the email was influential, precise, someone with a name and power that suggested he could affect opportunities beyond personal relationships. She paused, rereading the phrasing, the careful wording of every clause, the kind of attention to detail only a person used to control could have. The company mentioned, the tone of authority. It was enough to hint at someone at the top. And yet, she reminded herself, she wasn't desperate. She was careful, cautious. She could read the terms, ask questions, even cross-check details before committing. If it felt wrong, she could walk away. She would walk away. But something about the precision, the confidence, the silent weight behind the words made her keep reading. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. Questions came to mind. Duration, responsibilities, and his replies were equally sharp, efficient, and unflinching. No empty promises, no attempts to charm. He was precise, cold but fair. Helen read each carefully, measured every word. She wasn't agreeing lightly, she was calculating, observing, ensuring her autonomy wouldn't be compromised. The meeting took place in a private penthouse overlooking the city. The atmosphere was quiet, tense, but impeccably curated. Soft lighting, neutral tones, a single glass table between them. Sang-young Park explained the terms in clear, clipped sentences. No love. No intimacy. No interference. Fixed duration. Helen listened, eyes steady, her voice calm. "I understand. I have questions, and I expect clear answers. I am not desperate, but I am careful. We are both professionals, yes?" Her mind had not decided fully yet. She was testing him, testing the boundaries of this strange, calculated arrangement. But the clarity, the absence of false flattery, gave her a sense of control she rarely found in men. He inclined his head, approving the clarity in her tone. "Precisely. That is all." For the first time that evening there was silence. Not the awkward kind, but the quiet of two people measuring boundaries, weighing futures, acknowledging the unspoken. This was a transaction, nothing more. And in that moment, Helen knew that she had not surrendered her values. She was entering cautiously, with her eyes wide open. The contract was signed, but the story was only beginning. The morning after the private signing, the penthouse felt simultaneously vast and hollow. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting soft stripes across polished floors, but the apartment had no warmth beyond its perfection. Helen carried herself through the space with careful composure, placing her modest suitcase in the room assigned to her. The silence was profound, deliberate, unbroken, a constant reminder of the arrangement. Sang-young Park entered moments later, impeccably dressed as always, carrying only a thin leather portfolio. He stopped briefly at the threshold, studying her with an inscrutable gaze before giving a curt nod. The house rules are simple. Separate rooms. Meals are scheduled. Meetings are coordinated through Yesun. There are no deviations. Helen inclined her head politely, acknowledging the boundaries. Understood, she replied evenly. There was no challenge in her tone, only a clear delineation. She would follow the rules, but she would not be diminished by them. Meals together were formalities, served in the sleek dining room with precisely aligned cutlery and neutral-toned china. Conversation was minimal, strictly logistical. Helen noticed the subtle control in his gestures, the way he poured water with meticulous care, the timing of his responses, the almost imperceptible monitoring of her reactions. She mirrored his composure, observing without inviting intimacy. The evenings were quieter. Helen found herself sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights below reflecting faintly in her coffee cup. The apartment was immaculate, elegant, and cold. She thought about the email, the careful phrasing, the calculated professionalism. It had been him. That realization hovered in the back of her mind like a shadow. Sang-young, for his part, maintained his stoic distance. Yet there were moments when his attention lingered, a slight narrowing of his eyes as Helen moved through the apartment, the quiet observation masked by his habitual calm. He justified it to himself as monitoring the contract's integrity, but there was an unfamiliar edge to the awareness, one he could not yet name. Helen discovered small ways to assert herself, adjusting the placement of her laptop on the shared desk, selecting her own meals within the schedule, walking the narrow path of autonomy without breaking the rules. She was careful, always, but even in restraint, there was quiet strength. At night, when the city hummed below and the penthouse seemed suspended in its own universe, Helen allowed herself a private thought. This is not love. This is not marriage. But I am still myself. I am careful. I am in control. And somewhere across the apartment, Sang-young reviewed the same documents he had signed the night before, calculating efficiencies, schedules, and obligations. Only now, he noticed her presence more than before, her composed movements across the room, the confidence in her hands as she arranged her workspace. Not a word was spoken, not a glance lingered too long, but an unspoken tension built between them, a slow heat under the veneer of professionalism. The contract bound them, but it could not contain the subtle sparks of observation, the quiet measurements, the slow awareness of each other's presence. In that carefully structured apartment, their lives intertwined without words, without touch, without acknowledgement of what might slowly, inevitably, begin. The first public appearance was understated, a networking dinner for international investors, held at a sleek hotel ballroom in central Seoul. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the polished floors, and servers moved silently between tables. Helen adjusted the hem of her navy sheath dress, her posture poised, her expression composed. She was aware of every gaze, every detail, the careful choreography of a professional in unfamiliar territory. Sang-young Park entered behind her, impeccably dressed, his black suit tailored to perfection. He moved through the crowd with the controlled precision of a predator surveying the room. When he caught sight of Helen walking alongside him, perfectly measured in her movements, a subtle tension coiled in his chest, one he quickly suppressed. He told himself it was observation, professional oversight, nothing more. Helen had anticipated this. She had prepared for questions, potential scrutiny, and the subtle politics of investor expectations. Her answers were concise, articulate, and measured. When a prominent investor commented on her expertise, noting her role in a recent tech initiative, she smiled politely, thanked him, and transitioned the conversation with practiced ease. Her intelligence and composure were visible, undeniable, and quietly magnetic. Sang-young noticed everything. He noticed the way other men subtly shifted closer during introductions, the polite admiration in their eyes. His attention sharpened, not as the CEO overseeing a deal, but in the quiet, internal way he would have denied if asked. Helen, too, felt the weight of his gaze, though she did not turn to meet it. She continued her interactions with calm authority, aware of the unspoken tension growing between them. Every question answered, every handshake executed with confidence, seemed to pull a subtle thread between the man acknowledgement neither dared to name. During a brief pause, Sang-young stepped closer. "Do not speak for me," he said quietly, almost a whisper, as Helen had been guiding a conversation for him. There was no anger in his tone, only a controlled precision. Helen arched an eyebrow, lips barely twitching in amusement. "I'm not speaking for you. I'm answering their questions," she replied evenly, her gaze unwavering. The unspoken rebuke did not escape him, nor did it break the carefully maintained distance. Later, as they stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city skyline, the noise of the event behind them, Helen finally allowed herself a quiet breath. She had navigated the evening flawlessly, maintaining autonomy while honoring the contract. In the reflection of the glass, she caught a glimpse of Sang-young's profile, rigid, disciplined, yet undeniably attentive. The realization brushed against her mind. He had noticed, even if he would never admit why. Sang-young, on the other hand, reviewed the event in his mind with the meticulous precision he applied to boardroom deals. Every nod, every compliment, every subtle shift of attention from investors all noted. But he could not account for the unease creeping in, the quiet awareness of Helen's presence that went beyond contractual necessity. In the empty car ride home, the tension persisted. Helen's calm composure remained intact, her mind cataloging the evening. Sang-young remained silent, staring ahead, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed the first flickers of something unacknowledged. The contract still bound them, yet neither could ignore the subtle gravitational pull forming between them. It was a silent acknowledgement, unspoken but undeniable. Helen's capability had drawn attention beyond what the contract required, and Sang-young's observation of her careful, restrained, dangerous in its quiet intensity had begun to shift the rules he had so meticulously set for himself. In a world ruled by contracts, schedules, and efficiency, an unmeasured variable had appeared, and neither of them could yet predict its consequences. The first rays of sunlight crept across the city skyline as Helen sat at her apartment's sleek breakfast counter, coffee in hand. Her phone buzzed insistently. Yesun's name appeared on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Good morning, Ms. Anthony," he said. His tone was polite, measured. "Sir requested your availability for a media briefing. He has also scheduled an impromptu meeting with the investors prior to the session." Helen frowned slightly. Impromptu meetings were part of her life now, she reminded herself, but the precision in the wording "sir requested" was unmistakable. It was not casual oversight. It was controlled orchestration. "Understood," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Please confirm the location and the materials I need to prepare." "You're being sent the agenda and talking points," Yesun replied. "Sir also mentioned adjustments to your schedule for tomorrow. He insists on reviewing your interactions with the press beforehand." Helen set her coffee down, taking a slow breath. She was aware of the subtle shift. The contract allowed for public appearances, but this felt different. He wasn't delegating, he was guiding, framing, orchestrating. Carefully. Calculated. At the briefing, Sang-young stood beside her, tall and imposing. His dark eyes scanned the room with meticulous control, and when he noticed Helen beginning a response that he deemed misaligned with his vision for the investors, he stepped slightly forward. "Let me clarify," he said smoothly, interrupting her mid-sentence. Helen froze. The words were professional, almost courteous, but the intent was unmistakable. A corner of her mouth curved, barely noticeable. "I believe my point stands," she said evenly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "It addresses the question fully and accurately." He paused, just long enough to register the subtle defiance, then nodded slightly. "Noted," he replied, voice clipped. And yet, the twitch at the corner of his eye betrayed that her calm resistance had unsettled him. Throughout the session, the pattern repeated. Small interventions, justifications masked as efficiency, a comment reframed, a schedule adjusted, an interaction redirected. Sang-young's precision and control had always served the boardroom. Now, unconsciously, he applied it to her methodically, silently, almost imperceptibly. Helen's mind catalogued every instance. She recognized the pattern immediately, not arrogance, not malice, but ownership masquerading as necessity. She did not respond with anger. She responded with clarity. She asked questions, posed alternatives, subtly yet firmly reminded him of the boundaries the contract established. Later, as they walked through the lobby toward the waiting car, Sang-young's expression softened only fractionally. You handled that well, he said quietly. I could not have asked for better articulation of our position. Helen lifted her gaze to meet his, neutral yet pointed. I am capable, she replied. Contract or not. For the first time, the tension between them was neither professional nor transactional. It hovered in the space of unspoken recognition. He saw her intelligence, her authority, and the deliberate choices she made to maintain autonomy, and she saw him the careful strategist, precise and controlling, yet unaccustomed to someone challenging him without fear. In the car ride home, silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged. Helen's thoughts swirled. He controlled, guided, orchestrated, but he could not dictate her will. Not entirely. And Sang-young, ever calculated, realized a new variable had entered his equation. Helen's competence and independence were not obstacles, they were anomalies, beautiful, unnerving anomalies that demanded attention. The contract still bound them. Rules were clear. Yet in the quiet moments between appearances, between words, an invisible current had begun, subtle, restrained, and dangerous in its intensity. Neither acknowledged it aloud, but both could feel it, the slow burn pull, the uncharted territory they were inching toward, with no blueprint to guide them. The evening air carried the hum of soul traffic as Helen adjusted her tailored blazer, checking her reflection in the glass lobby of the tech conference center. Investors, journalists, and company executives mingled in clusters, exchanging handshakes and smiles that masked ambition and calculation. Helen's confidence was steady. She had rehearsed her presentation and mastered the talking points. Tonight was about performance, not personal entanglement. Sang-young Park arrived moments later, impeccably dressed in a black suit, the faint gleam of cufflinks catching the overhead lights. He offered a brief nod to Helen, not a greeting, an acknowledgement of readiness rather than warmth. His eyes scanned the room, noting every detail. The posture of the speakers, the timing of introductions, and most sharply, the attention that subtly gravitated toward her. Helen began her presentation, voice precise, calm, and measured. She spoke with authority, her words flowing naturally, capturing the attention of the room. Investors leaned forward, journalists scribbled notes. She was performing brilliantly, exactly as she always did, yet something in the back of her mind stirred. Glances from Sang-young lingered longer than necessary, his dark eyes following her movements like a hawk circling prey. During the networking session afterward, a young executive approached her, complimenting her insights from the presentation. His tone was polite, but enthusiastic, clearly genuine admiration. Helen smiled and responded graciously, keeping the conversation brief yet professional. From across the room, Sang-young's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He did not speak, did not interfere, but his fingers curled lightly around the stem of his glass. Each laugh, each nod directed at Helen by another man, registered in the quiet chambers of his mind. The air between them subtly shifted, tension thickening around invisible lines of possession he refused to acknowledge. Helen noticed the change, the slight stiffness in his posture when she returned from a brief conversation. She raised an eyebrow, a small teasing thought forming. He's watching. Not the room, quietly, insistently. And he's tense. Her pulse remained steady. She reminded herself this was the contract, the agreement they both had consented to. Control. Distance. Clarity. Yet, beneath the professionalism, an unspoken current had emerged. Sang-young began adjusting her schedule subtly, suggesting alternative meeting times, commenting on who might or might not attend certain sessions. Always framed as efficiency or professional necessity, always polite, always careful, but the underlying tone carried a weight that Helen could not ignore. During a brief pause, she confronted him gently. You've been unusually involved today, she said softly, eyes meeting his. I am capable of managing the interactions without interference, Mr. Park. He looked away for a moment, then back, eyes unreadable but taut. It is better if coordination is clear. Miscommunication can be costly. Helen allowed a small, knowing smile. She recognized the subtle edge. Control, yes, but also something unspoken. Jealousy. Not the rash, visible kind, but the quiet, simmering type that revealed itself in meticulous observation and calculated adjustments. The night ended with both of them leaving the conference hall in silence. Helen reflected on the invisible pull between them. The contract still bound them. The rules remained clear, yet Sang-young's restrained possessiveness and her own curiosity were now active variables in a game neither had openly acknowledged. As she entered the cab, she caught a fleeting glance from him through the rearview mirror, sharp and deliberate. No words were exchanged, no emotions confessed. Yet both understood, with unspoken clarity, that something deeper, slow-burning and uncharted was beginning to take hold. The contract had not changed, but the tension had. And within that tension, something dangerous and magnetic began to grow. The late evening light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sang-young Park's penthouse, painting long shadows across the minimalist living room. Helen had just returned from a client dinner, her posture straight but shoulders carrying the weight of exhaustion. She placed her bag on the marble table and took a slow breath, trying to shake the stiffness of the day. Sang-young was already there, standing near the window, hands clasped behind his back, the city skyline mirrored in his sharp gaze. "Helen," he said, not greeting her formally but calling her name with an intensity she had not heard before. She turned, wary. "Yes? I rearranged your schedule," he said, stepping closer, voice low but firm. "There is a meeting tomorrow with investors from Tokyo. I moved your personal calls." Helen froze, sensing the subtle shift. This was not about efficiency. This was about control. Her pulse quickened, irritation rising beneath her calm exterior. She met his eyes evenly. "Mr. Park," she said slowly, "I manage my schedule. I am perfectly capable of handling my own commitments. You do not need to intervene." His jaw tightened. "I am ensuring the company's interests are protected. You must understand every detail matters. Every interaction." She shook her head, a flash of defiance lighting her eyes. "No. This is not about the company anymore. This is about you dictating my movements. That is beyond the contract." For the first time, Sang-young hesitated. His normally unflappable expression flickered, betraying something he had worked hard to suppress. Helen noticed, and the quiet tension between them thickened, tangible as the polished marble under their feet. He began, then stopped, frustrated by the awareness he couldn't voice. The truth hovered in the air, dangerous and unspoken. He had crossed a line, but pride and habit held him silent. Helen's gaze did not waver. "I am here because of the agreement, not because you can manipulate or control me. If this continues..." Her words trailed but carried enough weight to make him swallow. She didn't have to finish, the meaning was clear. She was prepared to walk away, and he knew it. The room seemed smaller now, the quiet punctuated only by the hum of the city below. Sang-young's fists clenched briefly, then relaxed. He was aware that this Helen's calm assertion was both a challenge and a revelation. She was not a pawn. She was not compliant. She was a professional, intelligent, self-respecting. And he had underestimated her. Helen gathered her bag, preparing to leave the tension behind, and paused. She looked back once, eyes steady. "Remember, the contract binds us professionally. It does not grant you permission to intrude into my autonomy." Sang-young did not speak. He merely watched as she walked to the door. A part of him, one he had never named, never acknowledged, sharpened with realization. Losing control was not an option. But he also could not lose her respect. The click of the door closing echoed in the apartment. He moved toward the window, gripping the edge of the sill, gaze on the glittering cityscape. The deal was intact. The contract was in place. But something else had shifted, something far more volatile and fragile than business. Helen, outside, inhaled the cool night air. She allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She had stood her ground. But beneath her careful control, a flutter of curiosity lingered. The man who had seemed untouchable, cold, precise, unyielding had revealed a crack, a hint of vulnerability she had never anticipated. Neither of them spoke of it, and neither admitted it. Yet both knew. The dynamic had changed, and the line between contract and something far deeper had been crossed. The slow burn was no longer subtle. It had become urgent, dangerous, and inevitable. The early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Sang-young Park's office, casting long lines across the polished mahogany desk. The city below was alive, moving fast, but the office felt like a separate world, controlled, measured, predictable. He stared at the chair across from him, empty yet present in memory. Helen had left that morning for a client briefing, her calm efficiency leaving an echo he couldn't ignore. Sang-young had spent the past few days reflecting, not in words, not in confessions, but in observation. He noticed small things about her. How she measured her steps on the marble floor, the way her fingers adjusted the sleeve of her blazer when thinking, the subtle pause before she answered a question to ensure precision. He had spent years mastering control, but she was a force that demanded respect, not domination. He sighed, closing his laptop and pushing away the day's reports. For the first time, he allowed himself a quiet acknowledgement. He could not bend her to his will, and he did not want to. What he wanted, he realized with startling clarity, was understanding, partnership even if he could not yet name it. Meanwhile, Helen navigated her day with meticulous focus. She had anticipated tension with Sang-young after the schedule incident, but found herself observing his absence of interference in small ways. He no longer rearranged her calls, no longer interrupted her interactions. At first, she wondered if it was negligence, or if perhaps he simply trusted her competence. But the little acts added up. Her autonomy was intact, respected, unchallenged. By late afternoon, she returned to the penthouse for a brief break. The door opened to find Sang-young quietly arranging a set of documents on the kitchen counter, a mundane, almost domestic act that somehow shifted the dynamic between them. He looked up as she entered, expression neutral, but the absence of his usual imperiousness was telling. "You didn't have to wait for me," she said lightly, setting her bag down. "I wanted to ensure these were organized," he replied, voice measured. No defensiveness, no prideful edge, just efficiency. Helen raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She understood. This was his version of apology, of change, and it mattered more than words. Over the next several days, Sang-young's actions became deliberate gestures of respect, letting Helen choose her own schedule, listening to her input on company events without interruption, giving her space when she needed it. Each act was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Helen, it was a quiet revolution. One evening, after a long meeting, he left a simple note on her desk. "You handled that flawlessly. Well done." No flourish, no sentimentality, just recognition. Helen read it, a small smile tugging at her lips. She realized then that the man who had seemed untouchable, cold and rigid, was slowly learning the art of patience, respect, and humility, not through words, but through measured actions. Sang-young watched from his office as Helen moved gracefully through the penthouse, confident, unflustered, self-possessed. He felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. She had become a mirror, reflecting back to him the parts of himself he could not control, the vulnerabilities he could not name. And yet, he welcomed it. The contract still bound them. The rules still existed, but the emotional distance that had defined their relationship began to erode, quietly, deliberately. Change without words, growth without confession. Sang-young Park was learning and Helen was noticing. By nightfall, both understood something unspoken. The transaction was no longer just business. Something deeper was stirring, subtle but undeniable, shaping the future one measured step at a time. The penthouse was quiet that morning, the sunlight spilling across the polished floors, warm yet revealing every detail. Helen sat at the dining table, sipping tea, reviewing notes for an upcoming client presentation. Sang-young Park entered silently, carrying a folder of reports. For the first time, there was no tension in the air, no unspoken battle for control. Just presence. He placed the folder gently on the table, a deliberate, careful motion. "You're prepared for the meeting," he said, eyes meeting hers. No authority, no command, just recognition. Helen looked up, noting the subtle change in him. The man who had once treated her like a professional obligation now treated her like a partner, equal and respected. She allowed herself a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I've got this." There was a pause, the kind that could carry words unsaid, emotions withheld but understood. Sang-young shifted slightly, then took a seat across from her. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't force closeness. He simply stayed, present, patient, letting the moment breathe. For months, they had navigated their contract, public appearances, private distance, the careful choreography of a marriage bound by rules. But over time, the rules had become irrelevant. Helen's autonomy was intact. Sang-young's walls had begun to crumble. The connection that had grown in silence, through observation and subtle gestures, now demanded acknowledgement. Helen closed her notebook, standing gracefully. "Sang-young," she began, choosing her words carefully. "The contract, it's done. We've honored it, but it doesn't define us anymore. I'm staying because I want to, not because I have to." He studied her, the way her eyes held certainty and calm. For the first time, he didn't measure his response, didn't hide behind control or strategy. His lips curved into a slight genuine smile, a rare, private victory. I understand, he said simply. I've learned that rules can't build trust. Actions do. And I want to continue with you, freely, without obligation. Helen's heart beat faster, not in fear, not in hesitation, but in quiet acknowledgement of the man before her. Strong, brilliant, and no longer untouchable emotionally. She stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. There was no dramatic declaration, no rushed confession. Just presence, mutual understanding, and the weight of months spent learning, observing, and growing together. Sang-young reached out, lightly brushing a strand of hair from her face. It was intimate, but not possessive. Gentle, but intentional. Helen didn't pull back. She leaned in, her forehead resting briefly against his. A quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding. A kiss followed, soft, deliberate, a promise forged not by contract, but by choice. They pulled back slightly, foreheads still touching, breaths mingling. For the first time, the silence between them was comfortable, affirming, real. The city outside continued its chaos, but inside the penthouse, time slowed. They had chosen each other. Freely, fully. The contract that had begun as a necessity, a shield against loss, had faded into irrelevance. What remained was trust, respect, and a love that had grown slowly, quietly, deliberately. Helen Anthony and Sang-young Park had entered the agreement as strangers. They emerged as partners in every sense that mattered. And as the sunlight warmed the room, Helen whispered, almost to herself, "This is ours, not anyone else's." Sang-young nodded, his hand covering hers. "Ours," he echoed. "No rules. No obligations. Just choice." If you enjoyed watching Helen and Sang-young's story unfold, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more cinematic romance stories. Let us know which part of their journey touched you the most.